Hey everybody, I hope you're doing well. Mike DeAndre here, founder at DeAndre Financial. Wanted to introduce our latest webinar recording entitled, Is Your Estate Plan COVID Ready? In this webinar, we're going to be covering all sorts of details as it relates to estate planning, obviously, including the documents, some strategy, some techniques, and in particular, a little bonus content on how to document properly your adult dependent children. Okay, there are some special circumstances that we need to pay attention to as it relates to them. So also next week we have a special guest joining us on our program, and that is going to be Stacy Delisle. She'll be here on June 4th at 10:30 in the morning. We're going to be talking all things local real estate. So you're going to want to be sure to RSVP for that and attend and be ready with any questions that you may have as it relates to local real estate. So grab yourself a pen, grab your pad of paper. If there's anything that comes to mind when you're watching this video, jot it down. You can feel free to give us a call at 240-285-9820, and we'd be glad to answer your questions or help you with any implementation as it relates to your estate planning. Take care. 70% of individuals do not have an estate plan. And there are a host of reasons why that's the case, but it's a pretty disappointing fact. And when you consider, once we really dig into the reasons why people fail to plan, we can really start to eliminate those and build a scenario where needs can be met. There can be a smooth transition from one unfortunate situation to hopefully a better situation for the survivors. And there doesn't need to be a lack of guidance, a lack of documents, and a lack of direction. And so we know that our problems really don't go away. When we have a situation that pops up, it's rarely going to fix itself on its own. We all, I'm sure, have stories. I drove for a while with a bolt in a tire, and you can imagine, for a while it seemed like it was okay, but eventually it caught up with me, and there I am on the side of the road trying to fix a tire that I knew for weeks would eventually, create a problem. So a bolt in a tire is nothing like not having a will or not having a power of attorney or medical directives. So we want to identify the things that are going to be a problem. We know that there are times when sometimes we get sick, sometimes we may become incapacitated. If we're really honest, we acknowledge that our life has an expectancy. It only has a certain number of years, a finite window, and we don't know how many years we're going to get. So we need to plan ahead to make the most of the opportunities and how we can construct and organize our affairs and make it better and a simpler transition for the loved ones that we care about. So again, it all really comes down to recognizing the difference. And we've seen this chart many, many times. We can't control when we're going to pass. Okay, we know that it's going to happen, but we can only control sort of those things that come into the middle. We know it's going to happen. We don't know when, but what can we do in the middle there that we can focus on, and we can make this as simple a situation as possible. So with that in mind, I'm not a big fan of theoretical and esoteric solutions. Okay, I want something that's practical. I want something that's implementable. In the current situation that we're in right now, where many of us are in lockdown, Maryland's still a pretty vibrant place. If you've been driving, there's a lot of traffic. There's a lot of people out. If you've been at Lowe's or Home Depot, it's pretty packed. But in general, it's harder to get appointments. If you need to visit a bank, it's a little bit more difficult. A lot of government offices have been closed. Courthouses have been closed. So conducting business isn't as easy as it typically is. So the comments and the things that we're going to cover today, they are 100% implementable from home. Okay, I really thought that was important, that there's nothing we're going to talk about today that can't be implemented right away, and that we can't make a meaningful impact immediately in your situation. They're all legal. Everything we're talking about here is tried and true. It is there is no gray area, no funny business, no monkey business. Everything we do, we can implement and be 100% legal, and we can do it quickly. 72 business hours to turn around the documents and get everything structured, provided you understand and that sort of you have the people in place for guardianship and for custody and things of that nature. We can turn these documents, and we have resources that can turn these documents around very, very quickly from your sofa right away. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about the current reality. And it's a little bit of a disappointing reality right now. So it's likely you know someone who's had the virus, and hopefully you don't know someone who's gone into this situation, but we probably heard of it on the news or heard of it on television where they're at home and they're not doing particularly well, but they have a they're on their sofa, they're in their bed, they're quarantined, they're isolated in their home, but then it gets to a point where they have to go get medical attention, they have to go get care. So the ambulance comes, picks them up, takes them off, they go into the hospital, they're isolated in the hospital. You may not get to see that loved one again. And if you don't have the right documents in place, you don't have the steps, if there hasn't been planning ahead, coordination, communication, discussion ahead of time, this can be a horrific and terrible situation. And we know it's happening. If you refer back to the 70% situation, it's happening much more than it should. But that's our current situation. And the reality, again, is that existed before coronavirus. It's going to exist after coronavirus, not necessarily the isolation components, but the fact that we need to have, we can have our pieces in place ahead of a crisis. So what does planning offer us? Planning gives us the opportunity to identify the decision makers that we want to have acting on our behalf, whether we're incapacitated or we've passed on. It allows us to create the stream of assets. So we can decide who is going to receive how much and when. Okay. It will provide for guardianship decisions. So if and if you're a grandparent, you may be on that list. Okay, it doesn't necessarily mean that if you don't have kids, that you aren't part of someone else's guardianship plan. So this is where that coordination and that communication really comes into place. Also, control. If you don't have the documents that make certain things happen, your wishes, even if they have been communicated verbally, may not get carried out the way that it was intended. And sometimes the consequences for that can be pretty significant. And also simplicity. Nothing simpler than when your wishes can be ironed out, communicated, thought through, and then executed by the individuals. In these circumstances, there's generally some sorrow, there's some heartache, there's some stress, there can be financial stress, there can be emotional stress. When people have to make decisions on the fly and think on the fly, that just compounds the problem. So then when you can bring the simplicity of giving them a roadmap to follow on how to execute these wishes in these circumstances, it really can make for the best of a worst case scenario. So step one in this process, we have to gather the documents. So if you currently have estate planning documents, and we'll get into some of the individual components here in the next few slides. If you currently have them, that's wonderful. If you haven't reviewed them in, say, a year and a half, it's really time to take them out, dust them off, and review them. Read through each document, read through each page. If you're married, read it with your spouse. If you have you know who you want to have your POA, you know who the individuals that are going to participate in executing these documents, review to the degree with them that you feel comfortable now. Okay, make sure that you share the location of those documents. We're going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute, but gather your documents, get them all in one place and read through them. Okay, so what documents are we talking about? We're talking about your will. Okay, and again, I'm going to describe this in ways of whether you have the will or not. Okay, we need a will. The will is sort of that first starting document. And even if the will's only job is to push all the assets that aren't in the trust into a trust, that's fine. But you still need a will as sort of that first governing document. Okay, trust documents. You want to make sure you have all of those gathered, that they're the most current documents available that have been drafted and put into effect. Gather your financial power of attorneys, your medical power of attorneys, all of your insurance, whether it be long-term care, life insurance, health savings accounts, disability at work, long-term, short-term, whatever insurances that you have, whatever risk management components that you have to your estate plan or to your financial plan, gather them up, and then all of your investment assets and retirement assets. Okay. Maybe this is why people don't do this. I don't know. It's a lot of work, but it's really, really good. Also, don't forget your digital assets. Okay. I'm just going to read through a list here. And when I was preparing for this, I knew this to be the case, but when you really start mapping it out, you're like, man, this is a lot of stuff. So if you own a computer, if you have digital photos, digital music, if you have phones, tablets, if you compose that digital music and it has certain value, if you have hard copy backups, whether they be of tax records, business records, a business that you may own with someone else, who owns those documents? How are they titled? Who has custody of that? Who's responsible for that data and distributing that data? Do you do online bill pay? What are the usernames and passwords for those types of things? Is there any other intellectual property that's in a digital format or stored digitally in a cloud or some other way? All of those things fall under this whole new world of digital estate planning, and it is specific, and it is there can be extensive ramifications for not thinking ahead on how to handle your digital estate. So we can't ignore that. It's a lot. There's a lot more to this than just, leaving someone your Yahoo password. Okay. So when thinking of your digital assets, it's no different than your tangible assets. Is you want to have a list of what they are as best that you can compile. You want to potentially identify a separate digital fiduciary. You're going to name people who would be your POA for medical decisions and financial decisions, and maybe you need a separate fiduciary for digital decisions. And then you want to provide them instructions. You want to give them clear-cut instructions so that there's no ambiguity on who has rights to access and execute or act on your behalf as it relates to those digital assets. So we've talked a little bit about the will. Let's talk about your power of attorney. This is, if you are incapacitated while you are still living, this is probably your most important document that you need to make sure that you have, and it is current. The durability component of your power of attorney is just sort of a fancy way of saying that if you're incapacitated, this document is still valid. Okay, this document will last throughout the different sort of seasons of your life until you pass. Okay, you want to make sure that it is a durable document. This document provides continuity so that if it's 6 months, 8 months, a year, 2 or 3 years that a person is incapacitated, bills can be paid, properties can be maintained, there are their taxes can be filed, there are things that need to be done on your behalf. And if they aren't able to be done efficiently or without significant inconvenience to the people who are trying to help you while you're incapacitated, when you recover, you could wake up to a whole big mess. And we don't want that to be the case. This document helps make sure that doesn't happen, and that your affairs can be continued, and there can be continuity in your financial life as you are not able to handle those situations. Also, you really need to make sure that the person that you give these reins to is trustworthy, because they're going to have significant control over your situation while you're not able to act on your own behalf. Okay. So trusts. I did not lean on my keyboard. No, that is trust. Trusts. Do I need a trust? Okay. All of those things seem to be the normal reaction when you talk about trusts. They are this sort of mystery document that has special powers and wonderful privileges. And there's reason for that. And one of the reasons is that they're completely customizable. The trusts, whether they be a living trust or something that is in place while you're alive and that you can control while you're alive, or whether it's an irrevocable trust, something that can be created while you're alive, but you give up complete control of the assets that go into it while you're alive. Everything about a trust is simply put there because you want it there, and you give it a job, for lack of a better term. So you have the grantor, the individual who creates the trust. You have the trustee, the person who's going to manage the property, and then you have the beneficiary. Well, you get to pick who those people are. Okay, and then once it goes into place, it provides for not only just the ability to avoid probate, which that gets a lot of attention when it comes to trust, but that's really not the only or the primary reason to create the trust. But it's really about control. It's about simplicity. When you pass, the trustee can step in immediately and continue on and continue operating and executing on the instructions that you've provided. So trust can be fabulous, but there's no, oh, here's a trust off the shelf type solution. The trusts have to be reflective of what your wishes are, and they can be very, very custom, but it's very much a conversation and a process, not just sort of a document, maybe more like the power of attorney is. So medical directives. So there's a couple ways to satisfy and provide direction on the medical directive side. So this is an important document, especially when you're considering it from a situation of incapacity, so that you can have it helps two ways. You have a say when you aren't physically able to speak on your behalf, because you've pre-chosen, you've pre-documented how you want your care to be handled, or who you want to be making decisions. You can have the medical directive, or you can have a medical power of attorney. So if you have the medical directive, the document is the primary decision maker. If you have a medical power of attorney, you have an individual who can collaborate and be part of that process as an individual in making decisions. It is generally implemented when your probability of recovery is low, or it's already been determined that there is not going to be one. But it takes pressure off of the family. It removes the contention and the stress and the disagreements that could exist among survivors on how to handle your affairs, or what they think on your behalf you would have wanted. You get to spell all those things out ahead of time, and it really provides a great deal of peace in a difficult situation. We all remember the story of the Terry Schiavo case, which lasted for years and was just a horrible situation. We want to avoid that. This simple document avoids that scenario. See, this stuff's easy, no big deal. Okay, beneficiaries. The easiest to implement, and sometimes the easiest to miss. Okay, so when it comes to your beneficiaries, you want to pull out all of the accounts that have beneficiary designations and make sure that, and double check and make sure that they are complete. Make sure that if they're asking you for contact information for the beneficiaries, provide it. If they want to if there's an opportunity to break down, and there almost always is, how you want the beneficiaries to be paid out, make sure that that information is complete. Make sure it's legible. Make sure it's, is it a 10%? Is it 100%? How is it broken down? Does it all add up to 100? Believe it or not, that it happens where sometimes the documents are complete and the way they're incomplete, or the document's incomplete, and it's because it doesn't add up to 100. So take the time, review those beneficiary designations for the primary beneficiary, who is sort of the next in line, and then also the contingent. And so the contingent is the beneficiary should your primary predecease the contingent. So if it's a typical spouse situation, and it's the wife's account and the husband is the primary beneficiary and children are the contingents. If the husband passes before the children, the contingents move up into the primary situation, and then you should rerun with new contingents. Okay. Also, one of the common questions or checkboxes on a beneficiary form is the per stirpes decision. And just remember from your classical education and Latin studies that simply means by roots or by branch. So if a beneficiary passes, and say you have two beneficiaries, beneficiary A is alive, beneficiary B passes, beneficiary B's portion will pass to their beneficiary. So it stays in that branch or in those roots of a situation. Okay, so we have documents now. What you need now is a go bag. Okay. If we have any Jason Bourne fans in the room, you may recognize this. This is not the actual go bag, but you can see we've got passports, cash, we've got a peacemaker, we've got all sorts of stuff in this go bag for Jason Bourne, which you can actually buy at this clothier company. And if you want to be the coolest person at your estate planning review, you bring all your documents in a go bag, and I guarantee you're the coolest person in the room. But more importantly, you need a go bag. You need a way that you can take these documents, because you can't necessarily hand a doctor a PDF or say, hey, someone will fax them ahead. You want to have these documents with you. Okay. You want to have these documents available to you in a case of an emergency. And again, we're talking about a situation right now under the COVID environment where we don't know if there's going to be an emergency or not. So having them at a bank deposit box is wonderful. But if the bank's closed, or you can't get into the bank, or you're the one who knows what the bank is and you have the key and all that, and no one else knows, they can't get to your documents. And the documents essentially are worthless to you until someone can get those documents and present them. So you want to you just grab an envelope, grab something, a Tyvek bag, a FedEx slip, whatever it is, compartmentalize all these documents, gather them up. So what do you need? You want all of your estate planning documents, okay? You want a list of medications and dosages that you can have them with you because you may not be going to your medical facility, or you may not be going first to stop off at your primary care physician, or your primary care physician may not even be able to communicate with your emergency medical staff. So list of medications and dosages, allergy information, personal information, emergency contact information, your primary care physician's information. I think it's also good for the advocates to have a notepad, some pens, some cash, and keep this by your primary exit. So if you're like me and you have 7 exits to your home, you want to pick the exit that goes into the 7-car garage. No, I'm just kidding. But have the documents by your primary exit, okay? So that when you are if the worst case happens, again, planning is often for worst case scenarios. When everyone's healthy and their money is flowing and everyone's employed and everything's great, planning is like, hey, that's kind of nice. I'm glad we did it, but man, I don't really need it today. Okay. You plan because it removes the sting of the worst case scenarios. Okay. So when you have these documents and you have them in the right place and you have to rush out the door, again, stressful, difficult environment. I remember, I don't know if anyone's ever experienced this before, if you have one of those carbon monoxide detectors in your home, and they often, in fact, they only go off at 3:25 in the morning, and they only go off when it's 16 below, because what do when you have a carbon monoxide emergency? You open the windows, you open the doors, and you get all the heat out of the house. You make sure you bring all the cold frigid air in, and often, if you have an automated notification security system, you get to have firemen going through the house with fancy CO2 meters and telling you that everything is fine. Wait a half an hour, then you can go to bed. Okay. Well, even in a situation like that, it's still stressful. And if somebody said, hey, I need these documents, I need those documents, it might take me a little bit longer to sort out in my mind what's going on and how to get those documents in place. So if you're going to go through the trouble to do the planning, get the documents, keep them hard copy. We can have a digital copy. We can store it in our vault. You'll have access. We have access. We can have all the digital access you want, but you need the hard copy documents to travel with the patient, to travel with the individual, okay? Bundle them up, stick them in a bag, slip them in an envelope, build your go bag system, have them by the door and ready to go, okay? All right, so adult children. If you can't read that, it says, what happens when kids grow up and get adult money? Yes, sometimes our greatest fears revealed in that one image. But what do we do about adult children? And these are that college age dependent. Okay, they're under your roof, they're in your house, but the law still views them as an individual, as a sole person. Okay. So they still need documents. They don't have an estate in the classic term of butlers and fancy cars. They have an estate, though, in the eyes of the law, in that they have certain property, but that they also have rights to privacy. Okay. And because of those privacy rights, there's HIPAA authorizations that have to be navigated. They still need a medical power of attorney and a durable power of attorney. If they have tuition payments that need to be made, or reimbursements, or anything that you would need to act on their behalf, paychecks to cash, I don't know, I'm just you may need documents, and most likely you will need documents. As much as you know the family physician that you've been taking them to for 18, 19 years, and as much as you know the college or whatever the circumstance is, or the employer, or the hospital, the doctor, the nurse, it doesn't matter. If they're going to share information with you, even what room or what hospital the patient is in. Imagine your child, someone comes, takes and leaves with in an ambulance, or you get a call, hey, they took them from work, but you don't even know what hospital bed they're in. Okay. That's a pretty terrible situation. And you may call around and they may say, we can't tell you. You need the documents. Okay. We have a cheap, simple, easy solution to help the adult children so that this terrible scenario can be avoided and planned against. Okay. So let's review. We need to review documents or create documents. Documents are the engine that makes all of this happen. If you don't have documents, they're just wishes, they're just hopes, they're dreams. The documents put teeth to your wishes and dreams, okay? There's no reason not to do it now. And do it now can be the review, and maybe there needs to be updates and changes, but there's no reason not to do it now. Also, build the go bag, okay? If you're gonna go through the trouble of doing the planning and going through the trouble of putting everything together, build the go bags so they're right when you need, right where you need them, when you need them, and they're complete. Okay, so we've gone about a half an hour, which is a little bit longer than I wanted to, but if you have any questions and you want to pop them into the chat, that would be fantastic. So let me take a look here. One of the questions, if I already have a living trust, do I need a will? Yes. If you having a living trust does not mean you do not need a will. Okay. So if you have the trust, the scenarios are high that if you have a trust, the individual would have also done a will for you. But if you don't have that will, or the will's not as current as it needs to be, those documents really ideally would work together and be coordinated, but you would still need both documents. All right, what is the difference between a revocable? Okay, so someone's been doing some trust work. So a irrevocable trust is one that once it's executed, is whatever was put into that trust is removed from your estate, and you cannot directly control that asset. So if you try to reach in and influence that trust, that irrevocable trust, courts could decide that you actually had control and bring those assets back into your estate. Okay. A regular trust or a living trust is one that goes into place and is implemented when you sign the documents, you create the living trust, but you still retain control. The assets that are in there would still be included in your estate if there was a state income or inheritance tax or a federal estate tax applicable. Those assets that are in that trust would still be included, but you can change the parameters of the trust while you're alive. So they have different features, different benefits, and are sort of they sound pretty similar, but they're very different in how they're handled. Should we create a go bag for each person? Yes, that's an excellent point. So if there are 5 or 6 people living in the house and they happen to all be adults that would be subject to the same privacy protections of HIPAA, i.e. they're not your dependent young children under 18, then it would be important to have a go bag for each individual. It is that's a good point. In to have separate bags, whereas not one with all the documents, but each individual would have their own envelope, their own bag. I have this is something that you can get here on Amazon. Mine actually came here with 2. You pop it open, it's got the individual sleeves. There you go. You're good to go. Okay, very simple. And ironically, we can probably have your documents done before you get that Alpha Prime. It doesn't take that long. Any other questions? So, okay, the question here is how, I'll paraphrase, how important is it to avoid probate? Well, so probate in certain states, Maryland in particular, it gets a lot of attention because there's planning that can be done to avoid it, but it's not the end of the world if you do have to probate an estate, i.e. you have a will, but you don't have a living trust, or there isn't a significant amount of property that needed to be probated. And there are some states that have thresholds on what actually becomes sort of a billed probatable estate or not. So probate in Maryland's not terrible. Right now, it's a little bit more difficult because a lot of courthouses have been closed. So it's taking longer to get documents through and to get information processed and finished. But generally speaking, probate's not a terrible situation. But if there are, if you're going to do and go through the process of doing this planning anyway, have whatever assets can avoid probate or stuff in your trust, whatever you can, to go ahead and avoid it if necessary or if possible. So thank you for attending today's webinar on estate planning in the COVID environment. I hope that you learned some new things. Hopefully, as in most of the planning that we do, hopefully you don't need this in an emergency or high stress environment. But if you do, it's good to know you've taken the proper steps make sure that any sting is as minimal as possible. If you would like to visit our blog page, which is at deandrefinancial.com/media, we will be posting this webinar there and sending out an email alert as soon as this is ready. So thank you for attending. Again, feel free to reach out if you need any assistance, implementation, or just have a question as it relates to today's topic. And we hope to see you on the 4th for our conversation with Stacy Delisle on local real estate. Take care.